All right, so here's the video for notes 5-4, factoring quadratics. So let's take a look at this idea of using the box and filling in the missing pieces. So we know that when we use the box to multiply, we know that we get our final answer. Usually the first term comes from this box right here, 5x squared. We know the last term comes from this box. And we know that we get this middle term by combining this box here, and this box here, which means that we add those together and that makes negative 32x. And then we can kind of work backwards from here because we see some of the outside is filled in. So if this over here has to be x, we know that this, in order to make 5x squared, would have to be 5x. If this is a negative 2, then we know that this would have to be negative 2x. And now that we know that this is 5x, well, let's see. If this is negative 2 and this is positive 12, to make positive 12, we know that this would have to be negative 6, because negative 6 times negative 2 would be a positive 12. And then lastly, now that we know that this is a negative 6, we could do negative 6 times 5, which would be negative 30x. And we see that these two numbers add up to make the negative 32. And now we know what the original problem was, 5x minus 2 and x minus 6. So we basically broke down this quadratic into two factors, a multiplication problem. Okay, let's take a look at another one here, a little bit harder, where we're not given anything except that negative 9. And again, we know that this is going to be your x squared term. This is going to be the combination of adding your x terms, and this is going to be negative 36. Well, we have enough information to fill out some of the outside. If this is negative 9 and this is negative 36, in order to make a negative, we know that this is going to have to be positive, and it's going to be positive 4. And then from here, we can think about this x squared term over here, and we know that in order to make x squared, it has to be a 2x and an x. So I'm not really sure where the 2x is going to go and where the x is going to go, but I'm going to guess the 2x goes here and the x goes here, and let's see if we can fill out the rest of this. Well, if this is 2x and this is 4, that would mean this is 8x. And then if this is x and this is negative 9, that would be negative 9x. So let's just make sure that that makes your middle term. Negative 9 plus 8 does give me negative 1. And checking everything else, 2x times x is 2x squared, negative 9 times x is negative 9x, 2x times 4 is 8x, and negative 9 times 4 is negative 36. So we know that that has to be the correct answer. So we know that our original problem is 2x minus 9 and x plus 4. Okay, so essentially what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to take this polynomial and factor it into two linear binomials using the box, but now we're not going to be given anything on the outside. So that's what we're going to learn in this particular lesson. All right, so factoring quadratic. So we know how to factor using the GCF, and that kind of breaks down your polynomial a little bit, but what we're going to learn is that if we have a quadratic, that we're going to be able to factor it even more. So if we notice every single box problem that we did when we did a binomial times a binomial, a linear binomial times a linear binomial, we ended up with a quadratic trinomial, meaning 3 terms, that's x squared. So that means that we're going to be able to take any quadratic trinomial that's factorable and put it into factored form, which is going to be 2 linear binomials multiplied. So if a quadratic is factorable, it's going to look like this factored. The GCF is going to go out in front, and then we're going to have a linear binomial times a linear binomial. Okay, so this is the standard form of a quadratic, ax squared plus bx plus c. A is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is your constant term. All right, so here are some examples of factored polynomials. So if we notice here, we have r squared plus 9r plus 20. That factors into r plus 5, r plus 4. X squared plus 8x plus 15. So the thing that I want to point out here, that in this top row, we have a positive b value and a positive c value. So b is positive, c is positive. B is positive, c is positive. And if we notice that when we factor these quadratics, we have 2 positives inside our parentheses. Okay, in the next example, we have a negative b and a positive c. So negative b, positive c, negative b, positive c. And if we notice in our parentheses, we have two negatives. Okay, lastly, on this last one, what these have in common is that we have a negative c value in both of these, right? C is negative, and in our parentheses, we have a positive and negative. So the way that you can think about this, we know that in order to get that last term, we end up multiplying our constant terms. 7 times negative 4, and a positive times a negative will always give you a negative, right? A positive times a negative will always give you a negative. But in these cases up here, a negative times a negative will give you a positive, a negative times a negative gives you a positive, and a positive times a positive gives you a positive. All right, so this constant term is coming from the multiplication of your constant terms. So the sign of your constant terms is going to determine the sign of your C value. Okay, so here are the steps to factoring. And I don't want these steps to scare you. They're kind of just written out for reference. Eventually, you're going to be able to do this automatically, and you won't even have to look at this. So first thing we're always going to do for every factoring problem is we're going to check for a GCF, because we want to break down the quadratic as much as possible. So we check for a GCF, and we know how to factor that out. Then if we don't have a GCF and we have a quadratic, or we have a GCF and there's a quadratic in the parentheses, we're going to take that quadratic and we're going to write it across the diagonal of our box, just like we did in the earlier problems. So this is where the previous slide kind of helped us. So we're going to choose our sign. So we know if C is negative, that we're going to have one positive and one negative value. Okay, the one parenthesis is going to be positive, the other is going to be negative. We know if B is positive and C is positive, both of the parentheses have to be positive. And then if we have a negative B and a positive C, both parentheses have to be negative. Then what we're going to do in order to choose what goes inside the box, we have to multiply A and C, and we're going to list all the factors of this product. Then, in order to choose which one we do, we have to find the pair that adds up to B, because this is what's going to go in the two empty boxes, because we know that the x squared term is going to go in the top left-hand corner. Hold on, let me draw this out. Right, we know what goes here, that's going to be our x squared term, and this is our constant term. So to figure out what goes in these boxes, that's what we're going to use step 4 and step 5. Okay, so we're going to pick the pair that adds to B, because we know our B term's in the middle. We're going to pick the pair that adds to B if C is positive, or we're going to say it subtracts to B if C is negative, because we know that one's going to be positive, one's going to be negative, and then we're going to put those in our empty boxes. Then in order to get the outside, what we're going to do is we're going to take the GCF of the top row, and then we're going to work backwards to find the rest of the outside. Okay. What's nice about factoring problems is you can always check your answer using multiplication. And then finally, we're going to write our answer as two binomials, and if there was a GCF, we're going to have it written out in front. All right, so let's look at an example, just to make sure this isn't too overwhelming. All right, so here is our first example. So it says completely factor the polynomial 2x squared plus 13x plus 18. So number one, it says check for a GCF. So to check for a GCF, I'm going to look at my coefficients 2, 13, and 18 to see if they have any factors in common. Well, my only factors of 2 are 1 and 2. And since 13 is odd, that means I know that there's no common factor other than 1, which means that there's no GCF. So I'm going to say no GCF. So since we have a quadratic here, we're going to write that across the diagonal of the box. So we know that our x squared terms here, our 13x goes in the middle, and then our constant term goes in the bottom right-hand side. All right, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out what our answer is going to look like. So we know our answer is going to be two binomials. There's no GCF, so there's nothing written out in front. And we're going to see what our signs are going to be. So in this problem, I have a positive C and a positive B. So if B is positive and C is positive, that means my signs are both going to be positive. Okay, that also means that these are both going to be positive here. The numbers I pick are both going to be positive. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply A times C and list all the factor pairs of this product. So here's A, B, and C. So I'm going to do A times C, which is going to be 2 times 18, which is 36. And I'm going to list out all of my factors of 36. So 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and 6 and 6. Okay, we know that they're both going to be positive. So next thing I need to do is I need to find the pair that adds to B since we have a positive C. So now I'm going to add these together. And I need to find the pair that adds to B, which is 13. So 1 plus 36 is 37, so that's not it. 2 plus 18 is 20, so that's not it. 3 plus 12 is 15, that's not it. 4 plus 9 is 13. Bingo. So we know that this is going to be our magic pair that multiplies to make 36 and it adds to make 13. So now we're going to put those numbers in our empty boxes. So this is going to be 4x, and it doesn't matter where you put them since they're both positive. All right. Next thing it says to do, so now we have our box completely filled out. Now we need to fill out the outside. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the GCF of our top row. So looking at 2x squared and 4x, that's going to be 2x. And then we're going to work backwards to find the rest of it. So 2x times what will give me 2x squared? That means this has to be x. 2x times what will give me 4x? Well, 2 times 2 is 4, so this is going to be plus 2. And then we have x times what will give me 9x, so x times 9 is going to give me 9x. So now we have our outside completely filled out. Now what we need to do is we need to check each box using multiplication. So we know that we can multiply using the box. So x times 2x is 2x squared. 2 times 2x is 4x. X times 9 is 9x. And 2 times 9 is 18. And then check to make sure that our two x terms add to make 13x, which they do. So now we know we have our final answer. And now we're going to write our answer as two binomials. And then if we have a GCF, write it out, but we don't. So our final answer is going to be 2x plus 9 and x plus 2. Okay, so if you need a little practice getting the outside, this is just kind of an example of how to get the outside. So remember, we always find the GCF of this top row, so 5x and 25x. That GCF is going to be 5x, and then work backwards from there. So 5x times x gives you 5x squared. 5x times what will give me 25? That has to be plus 5. X times what will give me 8? That has to be an 8. And check to make sure that 5 times 8 is 40, which it is. And check to make sure that these two terms here add up to 33x, which it does. So we have our final answer, 5x plus 8 and x plus 5. All right, here's another example. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to check for GCF. And in this problem, it looks like there possibly is a GCF. So if I take my smallest factor, which is 6, and list out those factors, 2 and 3, we have to make sure, I think it could be 6. So 108 divided by 6, I'm just going to pull out my calculator, is 18. So I know that that's a factor of 108. And then 480 divided by 6 is 80. So I know that that's a factor of 480. So that means my GCF is going to be 6. So I'm going to divide everything by 6. I'm going to rewrite my polynomial. So it's going to be 6. Then it's going to be x squared. 108 divided by 6 is 18. So minus 18x. 480 divided by 6 is 80. So plus 80. Okay, next thing we do is see if we have a quadratic left over in the parentheses, which we do, which means we're going to be able to factor this more. So my final answer is going to look something like this. There's going to be a 6 out in front with 2 parentheses. Okay, this quadratic that's left over is going to go across the diagonal. So we've already factored out the 6, so that just needs to be put out in front for our final answer. What we're breaking down more is the parentheses part. Okay, so now that we're going to do is we're going to choose our signs. So we're going to look at the value of C. So C is positive and B is negative. So if C is positive, B is negative, so this is A, B, C, that means both of our signs have to be negative. So the numbers that we're going to choose both have to be negative. All right, next thing we're going to do is we are going to multiply A times C, which is going to be 6, or sorry, this is A, this is B, and this is C. So A in this case is 1, C is 80, so 1 times 80 is 80. And we're going to list out our factors of 80. So that's going to be 1 and 80, 2 and 40, 3 doesn't go in, 4 and 20, let's see, 5 and 16, and then we have 8 and 10. And remember, since both of them are negative, I know that these are both going to have to be negative. Okay, to find the pair that, we're going to find the pair that adds to make C, since we know that C is positive. So when we add these together, that's negative 81, so that's not it. Negative 2 and negative 4 is negative 42, so that's not it. Negative 4 and negative 20 is negative 24, so that's not it. Negative 5 and negative 6 is negative 21, so that's not it. And then we have negative 8 and negative 10 is negative 18, and that's what we're trying to make. We're trying to add to negative 18. So now we have our pair. It's going to be a negative 8 and a negative 10. So negative 8x and negative 10x. Okay, so now that we have our box completely filled out, we need to figure out what goes on the outside. So we're going to find the GCF of the top row. So x and 8x, my GCF is just going to be x. So this has to be x. This would have to be negative 8 to make negative 8x, and this would have to be negative 10 to make negative 10x, and check that negative 8 times negative 10 does give me 80. So checking all my boxes, x times x is x squared, negative 8 times x is negative 8x, x times negative 10 is negative 10x, and our two x terms adds to negative 18. So now I have my answer, x minus 8 and x minus 10. All right, here's one last example for the notes. So here I have my polynomial, 5x squared plus 18x minus 8. And then looking at my terms, let's see, my smallest number is 5, and the only factors of 5 are 1 and 5. And I know that 5 does not go into 18 or 8, which tells me that there's no GCF. Which means we're going to check if it's a quadratic, and if it is, that means we're going to be able to try and factor it more. So it's going to be 5x squared plus 18x minus 8. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to choose our signs for our answer. So we know our answer is going to be two binomials. We have A, B, and C here. Well, we see that C is negative. So if you see that C is negative, automatically know that your signs are going to have to be opposite. One's going to have to be positive, the other's have to be negative. That's the only way you're going to be able to multiply to make a negative number. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to multiply A times C, which is going to be 5 times negative 8, which is negative 40. And we're going to list out my factors of 40. So we're going to ignore the sign for now. So 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, and 5 and 8. And in this case, we are trying to find the pair that subtracts to B, because we know that 1's going to be positive, 1 has to be negative. B is 18. So I'm going to put a subtraction sign in between it, and what we need to do is we kind of have to go in both directions. So 1 minus 40 is negative 40, and then 40 minus 1, or sorry, 1 minus 40 is not negative 40. 1 minus 40 is negative 39, and then the other direction, 40 minus 1 is 39. So that's not going to be it. 2 minus 20 is negative 18. Okay, this seems promising. 20 minus 2 is 18, so that's it. So it's going to be 20 and a negative 2. So my positive number is going to be 20x, and my negative number is going to be negative 2x. Now that we have the outside, we're going to get our GCF of the top row. So 5x and 20x, my GCF is going to be 5x. and then we're going to work backwards. So 5x times x gives me 5x squared. 5x times positive 4 gives me 20x. X times negative 2 gives me negative 2x. And now let's just check all of our boxes. X times 5x is 5x squared. 4 times 5x is 20x. X times negative 2 is negative 2x. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Check that your two x terms, 20 and negative 2, make 18. That's good. So now we have our answer. So it's going to be x plus 4 and 5x minus 2. All right, so now let's go over a couple of the homework problems. So for the first set of problems, you're just filling out the outside of the box to get your final answer. So looking at, remember we always find the GCF of this row, x and 2x. That has to just be an x. So this would have to be an x. And then this would have to be a negative 2. And then this would have to be a positive 9. So x times x is x squared. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. X times 9 is 9x. Negative 2 times 9 is negative 18. And then that these two numbers add to make positive 7. So my final answer, x minus 2 and x plus 9. All right, number 2, again, finding the GCF of this top row. So 2x and negative 8x. My GCF is going to have to be 2x. And then 2x, this would have to be x. 2x times what will give me negative 8 is negative 4. The other thing you can do is you can say negative 8 divided by 2x is a negative 4. X times what will give me 7. That has to be a 7. Checking our answers, x times 2x is 2x squared. Negative 4 times 2x is negative 8x. X times 7 is 7x. Negative 4 times 7 is negative 28. So I have x minus 4 and 2x plus 7. All right, now some factoring problems here. So for these set of problems, you don't need to write down 1, 3, 5, and 7. You do need to do 2, 4, 6, and 8. So these are just examples to kind of help you. All right, so looking at number 1, first thing we're going to do is check for GCF. Well, if there's no coefficient in front of your squared term, that means there's not going to be a GCF. However, this is a quadratic, so we are going to be able to factor using the box. So n squared minus 4n minus 5. Okay, now we're going to pick the signs of our numbers. So let's see, our final answer. This is A, this is B, this is C. I have a negative C, which means one has to be positive, one has to be negative. Okay, we're going to multiply A times C, which is going to be 1 times negative 5, which gives me negative 5. So my only factors are 1 and 5. Okay, in this problem, we're going to subtract to make negative 4. Well, this is our only option, right? So we just have to figure out which one's positive, which one's negative. So 1 minus 5 is negative 4. 5 minus 1 is 4. So that means it's going to be 1 and negative 5. So this is going to be 1n and negative 5n. So now taking our GCF, looking at our top row, we have n and n, 1n, so that's just going to be an n. So this has to be an n. N times what will give me 1n, that has to be a 1. N times what gives me negative 5 is negative 5. Now we just check, n times n is n squared, 1 times n is n times negative 5n, 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. Check that your two middle terms add to make the middle, so we know we're good. Our final answer is going to be n plus 1 and n minus 5. All right, number 3. So right away I know there's no GCF since A is equal to 1. So that means there can't be any number that they have in common other than 1. So I know that I can go straight to my box. X squared plus 9x plus 8. I'm going to pick the signs of my number. So I have A, B, and C. Everything is positive, which means my parentheses are both going to be positive. And I'm going to multiply A times C. So 1 times 8 is 8. And now we're going to list out our factors of 8. So 1 and 8, and 2 and 4. Since C is positive, we're trying to find the pair that adds to make B. So when we add these, we get 9, and this is 8, so that means my pair has to be 1 and 8. So this is going to be 1x and 8x. So looking at my top row, GCF has to be x, and then working backwards. That has to be x up there. This has to be 1. X times what gives me 8. That has to be 8. Checking my boxes. X times x is x squared. 1 times x is 1x. X times 8 is 8x. 1 times 8 is 8. Check that your x terms add to make the middle, which they do. So now I have my answer, x plus 1 and x plus 8. All right, number 5. So looks like there could potentially be a GCF here. I think the GCF could maybe be 4, but I'm going to divide these terms by 4. 52 divided by 4 is 13, so that works. 160 divided by 4 is 40, so that works. I do have a GCF and it's 4. So I'm going to divide everything by 4 first. So then I have b squared minus 13b plus 40. So since I do have a quadratic, I know I'm going to be able to factor this more. The quadratic goes across here, and I know my answer is going to have a 4 out in front with 2 parentheses. I have my A, B, and C. C is positive, B is negative, so both have to be negative. We're going to multiply A times C, so 1 times 40. Factors of 40, 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, and 5 and 8. And we both know that they both have to be negative. So we're trying to find the pair that adds to make our B term, which is negative 13. So this is going to be negative 41. So it can't be this one. This is going to be negative 22. This is going to be negative 14. Negative 5 and negative 8 is negative 13. So there's our pair. It's going to be negative 5 and negative 8x. That goes inside our empty boxes. To find the outside, take the GCF of the top row. Oops, it's actually b, what we're using here. So b squared and negative 5b, that just has to be a b. So this would have to be a b. And then this would have to be a negative 5. And this would have to be a negative 8. And then check the boxes, which I'm going to skip for the video for the sake of time. And now we have our answer. All right, last example here. So again, it looks like there's a GCF, and the biggest my GCF can be is 5, and I know that 40 and 100 are both divisible by 5. So we're going to factor out my GCF first, so we're left with n squared plus 8n minus 20. I do have a quadratic, so n squared plus 8n minus 20. And I know my answer is going to look like this. Let's pick our signs. We have A, B, and C. So I have a negative C, which means my signs have to be opposite. We're going to multiply A times C. So 1 times 20, 1 times 20, or negative 20 is negative 20. So we're going to list out our factors. 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. And in this case, we're subtracting to make our middle term, since we know one has to be positive, one has to be negative. Okay, so 1 minus 20 is negative 19. 20 minus 1 is 19, so it's not this one. 2 minus 10 is negative 8. 10 minus 2 is positive 8. So it's going to be 10 and a negative 2. So 10x, or 10n and negative 2n. GCF of my top row is just going to be n, and this has to be n. This would have to be 10. This would have to be negative 2. And then we would check, but again, I'm going to just skip that for the sake of the video. So n plus 10 and n minus 2.